Honest J. Nowak. Oh yeah.
A pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to Honest J. Nowak. Now here on HGN, let me go ahead and take you on a little trip back to the early 1980s. They were a time when, of course, crime rates skyrocketed, but they also became an extraordinary point in history, American history that is, for being the chronological origin of the slasher film genre. If you're not really officially reconciled with that kind of franchise itself and that kind of genre in general, then well, let me go ahead and explain. A slasher flick happens to be a film, usually originating from the 80s, but of course it can originate at any given point in time, even up until today. But it usually stars a character who has a purpose for mainly wanting to commit murder, or crimes in general. Serial killers of all sorts happen to be known as slashers during the 80s, and leading up until today's time, where we got to officially gain a lot of recognition. Because in the many years that followed since the first few slasher flicks had originated, we were really stunned at how amazingly well put together these slasher flicks could possibly be. But these were horror movies that were centered on fictional tales bent on serial killers wanting to commit murder of all types. And there are, in fact, compilations of slasher villains out there in today's time that have happened to produce a high body count. But this all depends on how many videos, how many films that they were put in, and how many bodies they were able to rack up in each of them. Of course, who could forget that Jason Voorhees, an undead serial killer who happens to wield a large machete and wear a hockey mask to commit a lot of murders? And there have been more than 100 of them in the many years that have passed since the first Friday the 13th film had been released back in 1980. Technically making that franchise one of the first types of slasher film series to ever exist, but there were others along the way that came along, including Texas Chainsaw Massacre, as well as Halloween, Friday the 13th, and otherwise. And there was also Nightmare on Elm Street, and eventually others like Child's Play and Leprechaun. Now, in general, I really look up to a lot of these franchises themselves because they really served as a turning point towards many people out there who happen to not recognize these series pretty well. Because I guess the main thing about the slasher films is that they happen to really tell us a grim reminder that there are people like them out there in real life. If you're not remembering the Ted Bundy cases leading up until the execution in 1989, then well, you just gotta admit, it was films like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Halloween, and some others out there that told us about the many stories that people are in fact out there, even to this day, that happen to wield certain weapons on them and commit all sorts of crimes without having a lot of discipline handed to them by authority or otherwise. Of course, besides the Ted Bundy cases being a real-life serial killer, we got dozens of others, leading up until today. But the purpose of slasher films isn't really just about telling us about how people like those are real and that we always need to keep ourselves as cautious as possible when it comes to interacting with these kind of people in real life. Of course, another purpose of slasher films is the fact that many people happen to really embrace the kind of action that sets upon when it comes to having some people out there get brutally murdered. Now, many people see it as a form of entertainment, but for the most part, many of us just happen to grieve at the fact that these fictional characters end up getting killed on screen by these serial killers, whether they were good or not. But in any cases, I sure do hope that slasher films, even to this very day, they happen to still serve not only as a reminder of the fact that serial killers like them were existent back in the day, and that they still are, even to today, but the fact is that slasher films held a really big cult following, even to this very day. So, that's pretty much all that I got to talk about that. But if you want to see more, go down on my channel. Make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.